Hello out there today. Welcome to our podcast today. This is Coach EJ, the brand.
And this is Coach Aaron, the source. Okay, today's topic, guys. What's a championship or champion's mentality? You know, we talk a lot about the mechanics of what athletes should be doing, and we've got, there's so many different ways to get there and modalities, and, there's metrics and all these other things. But, me and EJ always talk about what separates guys at the highest levels is their mental approach. And there's just a lot of cues for us to talk about this, kind of prompted me to bring it up. I was looking at on TV, and I think it was going through 30 for 30 or something like that. And it talked about, they always have those championship sort of runs with the Detroit Pistons. I think that was one of them. And talked about Michael Jordan and his championship mentality. Obviously he had one. And then even just some of the stuff in the recent news. Now, we're not necessarily always trying to do what's topical because it's already overdone, but I think it also relates to the topic that was hot last week. Mm-hmm. The whole I think it was Katie Taylor and Angel Reese, the LSU basketball player, the Iowa and LSU basketball players. And I think a lot of that comes full circle, and championship mentality covers a lot of different things. And I think that's one aspect of it that you can kind of maybe chalk that whole thing up to, whichever side you're on. But anyway, that's kind of where we're going to go today, guys, is what does it take from the mental standpoint to be a champion, and how to put yourself in that state. And again, EJ, you actually just mentioned with playoffs coming up, first round of the NBA finals. And so I think it's a good time to talk about it, and maybe not just look at, how many 3-point shots that Curry makes, but look at, hey, how's this guy, navigating this space and this time mentally? What can you see? What can you take from that? And again, not just Curry, but anyone else. There's going to be a spectrum. Some guys are going to rise, some guys are going to fall. Why is that? So anyway, I thought it was a pretty good subject for the time.
I think it's a great subject, Aaron. Boy, I tell you, the last 2 weeks, we've had a lot of stuff go on in the world of sports. Like you said, NCAA women's final, the men's final. We've got the NCAA baseball kind of midway through the season, but the championships and playoffs are coming up. Like D2, D3 are going to happen. You've got the Warriors making their run, and all the NBA championships. But, I saw this special, Aaron, on Reggie Jackson.
Yeah, that was great. I love that.
What a good, just a excellent documentary on him, and misunderstood in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Misunderstood. And now you know where he's at, and that's that championship mentality, man. This guy was he was in the 70s, man. A lot going on in Oakland at that time. A lot of pressure on him, and going to New York and all kinds of stuff. But the mentality of these guys, and if you ever listen to Draymond Green's podcast, mm-hmm. and, I just think about all these athletes are going through this mentality and what they're thinking. Common denominator, Aaron, is that they rise to the occasion. They embrace this mentality of, I want to be the world champion. I want to be the best. And they will sacrifice. And the first thing they've always mentioned, all these guys, and especially when you just mentioned the Detroit Pistons and Michael Jordan, they always mention the team first. Yeah. It was always about, how do I help us win? I want to win. And to me, championship mentality is about collectively coming together and trying to strive for one goal, and that is to win a championship, and to put all your personal, individual stuff aside and go for that last trophy that makes you the best. I think that's the first thing, Aaron, is that you think of the team first. It's mentality. We want to win. We're together. And I think that's important, man. That's the one common thread that I've saw in this championship mentality with these guys.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, like you said, that's a common trait. I want to pare it back down to the individual. Okay. And just kind of look at, what does it take to have that mentality? Because again, I think it's something that may be innate in some of us as athletes, but I also think it's fostered by the environment, or it can be learned or trained.
Okay.
And the reason why I want to take that approach is because we've got a lot of younger athletes who have to or may have to develop that championship mentality. Mm-hmm. And so, I grew up in an era, or at least an area, where sports was equated to war.
Yes.
A lot of analogies that war and sports were similar, and you took that same type of approach. And I don't know if that is prevalent or that's taught anymore with a lot of kids because of, again, we can go back to the whole participation award sort of thing. Right. Everybody has value, kind of the whole touchy-feely, let's not make anyone feel bad sort of era that maybe some of the kids have grown up in, versus the, hey, sports is really black and white when you look down to it. You can take all the little nuances out of it and say, oh yeah, you played a great game, you did your best, but there's a winner and there's a loser. Second place is the first place loser. And that's just kind of how it is. But right. That's okay, that's sports. And so I don't know if that mentality is fostered as much anymore. So there may be a lack of urgency or maybe a lack of aggression with athletes. And so I'm just wondering, how do athletes navigate that? Because, and again, to go back to a recent topic, the whole Iowa LSU women's basketball thing. And, I think people were clutching their pearls because of the trash talk, and now obviously they made it a kind of a racial thing at one point too, and some of these other things. And again, I'm not going to get into that, but my feeling is this, if sport is war and sport is kind of a manifestation of physical aggression, mm-hmm. Then trash talk is kind of a logical extension to that. Because just like in combat, emotions run high, their feelings are a lot different. There's a lot more aggression, a lot more testosterone, all that stuff going around. And so I think that's just kind of something that's primal to us as humans that kind of comes out. And, you can look back and look at the history books and see all this stuff about Queensberry rules and all that stuff. But who knows? It's, I just think there.
I'm with you.
I look at it like this. There's a lot of bad words in sports. And if you're not hearing them, that means you're not playing at a high enough level.
Yes.
Because when you get to the highest level, there's a lot of shit talking.
There's tons of it.
And the greats do it all the time. Larry Bird, big S talker. Michael Jordan, big S talker. Track and field, there's this guy called Michael Sanford. He's one of the fastest guys in the world at one time. This guy, during the beginning of the race, walked across every lane to every competitor and said, who's going to get second today? So I don't know. I'm a neighborhood kid. That stuff doesn't bother me.
Yeah, like right.
That was just, when you were playing in the streets, you talked S all the time. And You know, and it's just funny to me how some people are taken aback by that when why don't you just go out and listen to how these kids talk at lunchtime who aren't athletes and all the curse words and F this and MF and B and da da da. You know, just the language in some of these kids' everyday life is a lot worse than what you're hearing on the court. Now, some athletes use that as kind of a way to pump themselves up, and then also as a way to take guys out of their game. You know, right. Everyone is different. So I just think it's part of the emotional outlet that we all kind of have, and is expressed differently for each athlete. You know, I wasn't an S talker, but I didn't verbally say anything, but in my head, I was like, okay, I'm gonna get these MFers today.
Absolutely.
That was, you know, and I mean, that guy on the mound, that MFer ain't gonna strike me out today, you know? So I think it goes along with that championship mindset. It's just that maybe it's expressed differently. And as long as you can turn it on and turn it off, and as long as you're not, you know, when the game is over, and you can, like I said, turn that off and not carry that over into anything after that, and shake guys' hands and say, hey, good game, whether you win or lose. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that's part of the championship mindset. That's where, you know, athletes are emotionally raising themselves to the next level. Because again, after all the training, after all the technical work, it really comes down to this up here. And a lot of coaches and athletes will say, oh yeah, you got to have heart. Well, the heart follows the mind.
Right.
The body follows the mind. So I don't really see it as bad a thing as, you know, most.
Agreed. The heart and mind work together, Aaron, in a championship mentality. What I find is that our athletes these days in a whole, just in a whole, I'm not saying every athlete, they don't compete all the time. And growing up in the era that I did, when guys competed, they competed hard, no matter what their ability was.
Yeah.
And they gave you everything they had. And we held each other accountable for that. And it was part of our mentality individually to hold ourselves to a high standard, to be ready to compete and have that mentality. That's how championships are won. And to go back to what you said, individual championship mentality, you had a pride in yourself that you didn't want to be embarrassed.
Yeah.
That if you didn't compete, you were being embarrassed. But if you competed, it's like, hey man, you gave your best effort, man. You didn't embarrass yourself. You didn't quit. Right. And I see these days as we train athletes, and the other day you and I were sitting at the front of Game Speed, and we were looking at all the uniforms, and we're going, look at that uniform, look at Crawford, look at Stevenson, look at Carter, all these guys that we're saying, that Romanowski, all these guys, and we said, man, they're just champions. They have that mentality that they can't be beat individually. And I think that's important. These athletes today don't know how to compete individually. It's like, it's all right to get after it, and then after the game, shake their hands. That's part of sport. Part of sport. That's part of a championship mentality, is your sportsmanship after the game. When you line up, you shake their hands. Good job, good job. It's a matter of respect. Championship mentality has respect there too, Aaron.
Right, exactly.
And that gets pushed to the side, you know? Like, it's all right to be tough in the game and compete and get after it, because like you said, your emotions are high. They should be high. You're elevating your game to its best. You've trained all this time to give your best effort. That's part of the championship mentality. It's a mindset that you have. And when athletes train, they must have this championship mentality when they train, because the more they get into that that place of high emotional state, they become comfortable with it when it's time to compete.
I completely agree. And I think because there may be a little bit of an emotional disconnect with some athletes, the way they're kind of brought up in sport, that they don't necessarily are able to make that switch, especially when you start to get into highly competitive sports. Now, I'm not proud to say this, but as a youngster, I was that kid on the mound, tears streaming, when I was getting balls called, or strikes called balls, because I was that intense of a competitor and emotionally engaged. That's on the wrong end of the spectrum, but my parents talked to me and said, hey, look, it's a game, you need to control yourself, and that was one of the life lessons I learned. But I was just so passionately, wanted to win and do well. I couldn't at that age keep my emotions in check.
Right.
But now I think, I've seen an era where a lot of that emotion is just taken out of it. It's like, this really doesn't matter. And, you did your best, but you're not always going to, do you understand what I'm saying? It's kind of soft shoot a little bit. And there's kind of like these built-in excuses for losing. And I don't know if that's part of it. And I don't know if I'm articulating it, correctly. But I think because our athletes aren't fully invested, and again, I think it's parents and coaches' job to keep them in the guidelines of what's appropriate.
Right.
But allow them to still put their all into something. And then at the end, after the results, give them the perspective of, okay, hey, you know what, you guys lost, but this was your best game of the season, or you did these things correctly that we were working on, to kind of round that whole thing out for them. I think the kids don't know how to really engage. We talk about, for instance, we talk about mental toughness. We have our whole podcast on how do you put the fight in the dog. Right. And there's a couple others that we've done that are related to this. And intensity, how do you get an athlete to be intense in their workouts? And I think it's a behavior that at the lower levels that has to be, I think, fostered and honed correct, or and built correctly. But at the highest levels, it's a skill. At the highest levels, it's a skill. And I don't expect everyone to understand that, because not everyone's been at the highest levels. Right. You have, and I have, and I've worked with a lot of other athletes at the highest levels, and that's a mentality that is a skill. For instance, I work with a lot of fighters. Andre Ward, nicest guy you can meet.
Absolutely.
But you know what? That dude, when he gets in the ring, has a mean streak that you wouldn't want to run into him in a dark alley. No. Bill Romanowski, notoriously highly competitive guy, mean streak, nasty on the field, but in person, very nice guy, almost quiet. So there's this kind of Jekyll and Hyde, to some of these very high performing athletes when that competitive switch is turned on, and they take that emotional energy and they channel it, and it helps them focus, and it helps them stay on task, and it helps them overcome adversity. And again, you can't just formulaically say, okay, well, if you stride here and you hold your hands here, and everyone's looking for that kind of stuff, and then those are just the mechanics. There's got to be some emotion. There's got to be some intent to what you do. to get the optimal performance out of your body. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to stretch the limits of the body. And I know everyone likes the science. They want to chase the science. But there's a human component to why science will always chase art.
Ooh,
science is always trying to explain the incredible. It's not the other way around. And they can only take an educated guess.
Hey, you couldn't have said it any better, man. I agree with you 100%. You know, and your phrase, I want everybody to listen to this closely. Science cannot chase art. Well said, my man.
Science chases art.
Science chases art. Exactly. Yeah. Science chases art.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say, man. That's like a mic drop right there, man. That's scary. It's scary because, Aaron, you know, at the end of the day, we're looking for, in that championship mentality, that athlete's competing at its highest. And you couldn't have said any better. When you're trying to perform a task in any sport, it's about your innate competitive spirit to do your best in that moment. And there's no way you can start thinking about mechanics or the science of any type of activity you're trying to master at that moment.
Yeah. And so I just think, you know, parents, you know, there's no, I think, again, formula on how to go about this approach, but maybe first thing is have a conversation with the kid about, you know, hey, what do you think about competition? You know, what do you see competition as? You know, maybe define it, have them define it, and kind of see where they're at on that spectrum, and maybe have that talk where you say, hey, you know, during competition, you can have these. It's okay to have these emotions. You got to keep them in check within the rules of the game and proper decorum, and you know, all of that. So you don't let, you know, them get away from you and get out of hand and ruin and tarnish the sport. But it's okay to have those feelings. Now, let's look at what else happened, you know, in the game. What besides some of the bad things that happened, what are some of the good things that also happened? And maybe you guys won, but it doesn't mean you have to, you know, trash talk after the game. You can put that aside and now say, hey, guys, good game.
Right.
You know, so, and that's all sportsmanship. That's all, you know, being an athlete, it's life. Because, again, I just don't know. I mean, you've got to, again, I keep saying this term, got to be emotionally invested in the things that you do. And if you're kind of dispassionate about it, you're not going to get the optimal performance out of your body. You're not going to get the optimal out of you in anything you do. So we're not robots, we're not automatons. And again, being able to do the mechanics is only one part of it. And that's where, you know, like I said, the art comes in. Art is an expression. Emotions are expression. To me, sports are an expression of yourself as an athlete.
Right.
So to put a governor on that or to mute that, I don't know if it serves the full development of the athlete in reaching their fullest potential.
Well said. Well said. Well, on that note, Aaron, those competitive notes, hey, I'm glad all of you listened to us today, and please give us some feedback on any subject you want to hear. But again, this is Coach EJ, the brand.
And it's Coach Aaron, the source. We'll see you.